My name's Paul. I'm 36 years old, and this past Christmas cracked something in me that had been sitting quietly for years. I always thought my family was unfair, sure, but I convinced myself it was just little things I needed to let go. A cutting comment here, a forgotten invite there. Small injustices that didn't warrant a fight. But sometimes, it's not the big blowouts that finally break you. It's death by 1,000 cuts, and the moment you realize your kids are bleeding from those same wounds, that's when you stop letting it slide. We'd all been told weeks in advance by my mom. This year we're keeping Christmas small. No gifts, no fuss, just dinner and being together. She'd repeated it more than once in the group chat, almost like she was hammering the message into stone. My wife and I exchanged glances the first time she said it, and I remember saying, honestly, it might be nice. Less stress. My kids, Michael, who's 11, and Sophie, who's 8, were disappointed, but we explained that Christmas isn't about gifts, it's about family. And to be honest, I believed it myself. The thing is, my parents have always been transparent about their favoritism. My brother, Daniel, is 2 years younger than me, and for as long as I can remember, he's been the golden child. He could wreck the car in high school, and it was boys will be boys. I got a B on a math test once, and I was lectured for weeks about wasting potential. When he dropped out of college, Dad helped him land a cushy job at his firm. When I graduated with honors and lined up my own career, it was, well, don't get cocky, life's long. I used to laugh it off, tell myself I was being paranoid, but the pattern was too consistent to ignore. Still, as adults, you try to put old resentments aside. I thought, at least around the holidays, we could be just a family again. And so we showed up on Christmas Day with bottles of wine, a tray of homemade cookies, and the firm belief that we were all playing by the same no presents rule. Sophie even drew a little Christmas card for my parents with stick figures of the whole family around the tree, and she handed it to my mom like it was treasure. Dinner was fine at first. The smell of roasted turkey, the fire crackling in the living room, kids running around in their socks. I even caught myself smiling as my dad told one of his old war stories for the 100th time. For a moment, I thought maybe this Christmas really would be different. But then, after dessert, my mom clapped her hands and said, "All right, everyone, gather in the living room. We have a surprise." That's when I realized I'd been naive. My brother's kids, teenagers, old enough to know how things work, sat down in front of the tree, and suddenly, boxes started appearing. Not just any boxes. Shiny, expensive-looking boxes, each one wrapped in silver paper and big bows. I froze, my arms still draped over the back of the couch. Michael leaned forward, his face lighting up, assuming maybe this was for all the grandkids. Sophie whispered, "Presents," in that small, hopeful voice kids use when they think magic might be real after all. But every box had one name on it, Daniel's kids. They tore into the paper like a commercial, and out came brand new MacBooks, designer bags, headphones, stuff that even as adults, my wife and I would have been stunned to receive. Sophie's mouth dropped open, and Michael glanced at me with confusion, like he was waiting for me to say, "Don't worry, yours are coming next." Except they weren't. My dad actually looked at me then, caught my eye, and smirked. He leaned back in his chair with his glass of scotch and said, "You understand." Not a question, a statement. Like this was just how things worked, and I'd better swallow it. I felt the heat rise in my chest. My wife squeezed my knee under the table, probably trying to keep me from exploding in front of everyone. But what gutted me wasn't the smirk, or the gifts, or even the blatant lie we'd all been told. It was Sophie, quietly sliding closer to me and whispering, "Dad, why didn't Santa come for us?" And Michael, older and more aware, staring at the floor and blinking fast because he didn't want anyone to see him cry. I helped them into their coats not long after that, telling my mom and dad that we had to get home early, even though we didn't. The air outside bit at my face, but it was nothing compared to the cold I felt inside. My kids walked in silence to the car. Sophie climbed into her booster seat without a word, and Michael buckled himself in stiffly. On the drive home, my wife finally said, "Paul, this isn't just favoritism anymore. This was cruel." And she was right. I stayed up late that night, staring at the glow of the Christmas tree in our own living room. The presents we had bought our kids, small things, books, board games, a couple of toys, sat neatly wrapped under the tree, waiting for morning. I thought about my parents' faces when Sophie handed them that handmade card. How they smiled politely and tucked it aside like it was nothing. I thought about Dad's smirk, Mom's clapping, Daniel's smug grin as his kids showed off their gifts. And that's when I realized something. They didn't expect me to do anything. They counted on me to swallow it, to understand, like always. But this time I didn't. The next morning, while Michael and Sophie tore into their own gifts and laughed like the night before hadn't happened, I sat at the kitchen table drafting a letter. Not a text, not a call, an old-fashioned, printed, sealed letter. Every word was deliberate, sharp, and final. By the time I signed my name at the bottom, I knew exactly what it would mean for my parents, and for Daniel too. When the letter arrived on their doorstep later that week, my mom called me. For the first time in my life, her voice wasn't firm or dismissive. It was shaky. My dad didn't smirk that time. They were speechless. And that was just the beginning. The morning after Christmas should have been peaceful. In our house, it was, at least on the surface. My kids laughed, playing with their new games, Sophie running around with her doll tucked under her arm, while Michael tried to set up his new board game. My wife and I exchanged little smiles across the kitchen table, but under it all, my mind was miles away. I couldn't stop replaying the night before. The silver wrapping paper, the smirk on my dad's face, the way my brother leaned back like he was king of the castle. The letter I'd written sat sealed on the counter, addressed to my parents. I wasn't even sure I was going to mail it yet, but just knowing it existed felt like I'd finally stood up, even if only in private. My wife noticed me staring at it, tapping my fingers against my coffee mug. "Paul," she said softly, "whatever you decide to do, just don't let them keep hurting you. Or the kids. Please." That's the part that stuck with me, the kids. Because in all the years of enduring favoritism, I'd been able to grit my teeth and carry on. But now it wasn't just me anymore. It was them. And that wasn't something I could shrug off. By the 27th, the phone call started. Mom left a voicemail. "Paul, we noticed you left early on Christmas. Everything okay?" The kids seemed quiet. The way she said it, as though my kids being crushed by blatant favoritism was some puzzling mystery, nearly made me throw the phone across the room. Then came another call later that day, this time from my dad. "Son, don't overthink things. You've always been a little sensitive. Christmas is about joy, not drama." The words dripped with dismissal, the same tone he used when I was 12 and dared to complain that Daniel got a new bike while I got socks. I didn't answer either call. I didn't need to. But what I hadn't expected was for Daniel to reach out. On the 28th, I got a text. "Hey, sorry about the mix-up at Christmas. Mom and Dad just wanted to surprise the kids with something special. Don't take it personal. You know how it is." I stared at that message for a long time. Don't take it personal. I could almost hear his smug voice, the way he always framed things as if I was the unreasonable one. My wife read it over my shoulder and muttered, "Mix up? They planned that whole thing." She wasn't wrong. They had coordinated gifts, bows, a big unveiling. That wasn't a mix-up, it was a statement. I typed a reply 3 times and erased it each time. The final message I sent was short. "Glad your kids enjoyed Christmas." Nothing else. Let him read into it whatever way he wanted. That night, I finally dropped the letter in the mailbox. The metal clang of the lid shutting down felt like a door closing behind me. 2 days later, the fallout began. My mom showed up at my house unannounced. No call, no text, just her knocking on the door at 10 in the morning with her winter coat still dusted with snow. My wife answered, and I heard the shift in her voice from warm to tense in half a second. "Paul, it's your mom." I came to the door, and she immediately started in, her face tight. "We got your letter." She held her purse in front of her like a shield. "I can't believe you'd accuse us of neglecting your children on Christmas." "Accuse," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "Mom, they watched their cousins unwrap thousands of dollars in gifts while they sat empty-handed. And you told us, explicitly, that this year was no presents. How is that not neglect?" Her lips pinched. "It wasn't neglect. It was different circumstances. Your father and I thought Daniel's kids could use a boost right now. They're in high school, preparing for college. We wanted to set them up with the tools they'll need. You're established, Paul. You have a good job. Your kids aren't hurting for anything." I actually laughed at that, a short, bitter sound. "So because I work hard and don't ask for handouts, my kids get overlooked?" She straightened her shoulders. "Don't twist this. You've always been dramatic. We've supported you plenty over the years. Really? I asked. When? Name one time you've supported me without comparing me to Daniel in the same breath. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Her silence was answer enough. Finally, she sighed, almost like she was tired of me. Paul, you need to let this go. It was just Christmas. Don't make it bigger than it is. But to me, it was bigger. It always had been. After she left, the tension in the house thickened. My wife hugged me in the kitchen and whispered, "You did the right thing. Don't let them rewrite this." But I couldn't shake the feeling that more was coming. And I was right. The following weekend, we were invited to a family brunch at my parents' house. The invitation wasn't really a request, it was an expectation. My dad's voice on the phone was firm. "Be here at noon. We need to talk as a family." My stomach turned, but against my better judgment, we went. I told myself maybe, just maybe, they wanted to apologize. Maybe they had seen how much their actions had hurt the kids. But when we arrived, I knew immediately that wasn't the case. The dining room table was set with eggs, bacon, pancakes, the usual spread. Daniel and his family were already there, sitting smugly as if they owned the place. My mom gestured for us to sit, but there was no warmth in her eyes. My dad cleared his throat, resting his elbows on the table. "Paul," he began, "we read your letter. And frankly, we think you owe us an apology." My wife's fork clattered against her plate. An apology? For what? For accusing us of favoritism and trying to drive a wedge in this family, Dad said firmly. "It's not right. We've done everything we can for you. And instead of gratitude, we get accusations." Daniel chimed in then, smirking. "You're always playing the victim, Paul. You've got a good life, a nice house, a stable job. But you can't stand that Mom and Dad sometimes help me out." I clenched my fists under the table. "Help you out? Daniel, you've been handed everything since you were born. And now my kids have to suffer for it." He shrugged. "Your kids are fine. You're just upset because for once, people saw them not getting the spotlight." That was the moment I realized this wasn't about fairness or misunderstandings. It was about control. They wanted me to accept my place, the overlooked son, the quiet one who never made a scene. They wanted me to sit at that table, smile, and tell them they were right. But I didn't. "I won't apologize," I said evenly. "Not when you hurt my children." The room went silent. My mom's eyes narrowed, and my dad's jaw tightened. Daniel leaned back in his chair, grinning like he'd won something. And in that silence, I felt something shift. This wasn't just a family disagreement anymore. This was a battle line being drawn. And once it was drawn, there was no going back. When I refused to apologize that day at the brunch table, the silence that followed wasn't just uncomfortable, it was dangerous. You could feel the shift, like the whole house had tilted and everyone was scrambling to find their footing. My mom pursed her lips, her hands folding and unfolding in her lap. My dad's face turned red, his knuckles tightening around his coffee mug. And Daniel, of course, leaned back with that smug grin that said he was enjoying every second of this. "Paul," my dad said finally, his voice sharp enough to cut glass, "do you have any idea how ungrateful you sound? Your mother has bent over backwards for this family for years. And this," he jabbed a finger toward me like I was a defendant in court, "this is how you repay her? With accusations? With poison? Poison?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Dad, my kids cried on Christmas. They asked why Santa didn't bring them anything when their cousins got everything. And your response was to smirk and say I should understand. If that's not favoritism, what is it?" Mom's eyes hardened. "Your children are not starving, Paul. They have parents who provide for them. You're twisting a joyful night into some sob story because you can't let go of your resentment toward your brother." I almost laughed at the absurdity, but I could see my wife's hand trembling as she reached for her water glass. She hated confrontation, but even she couldn't stay quiet. This isn't about Paul's resentment. It's about fairness. It's about telling us no gifts, then staging a spectacle for Daniel's kids. That wasn't oversight. That was deliberate. Daniel leaned forward then, dropping his smirk for something colder. "Maybe it was deliberate," he said, his tone dripping with contempt. "Maybe Mom and Dad wanted to send a message. Your kids don't need gifts to be happy. Mine do. They have more pressure, more responsibility, more expectations on them. They're being prepared for the real world. Yours, well, they'll be fine." The audacity of it nearly floored me. Prepared for the real world? I shot back. By being handed MacBooks and luxury bags? You mean spoiled for the real world? Dad slammed his hand on the table. The dishes rattled. Enough. This is not up for debate. We are your parents. We will not be disrespected in our own home. If you can't accept how we choose to celebrate, then maybe you shouldn't come around. The words hung in the air like smoke. My chest tightened. It was one thing to be overlooked, but to be told, flat out, that my presence was conditional on my obedience? That cut deeper than anything before. My wife stood then, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Come on, Paul. Kids, let's go. Her voice was steady, but I could see the fire in her eyes. Michael and Sophie slid off their chairs quickly, sensing the storm. As we gathered our coats, my mom called after me, her voice sharp. Paul, don't you dare punish us by keeping the children away. They're our grandchildren. They deserve to know their family. I turned back at the doorway. Then maybe you should start acting like family to them. We left, the heavy silence in the car on the ride home broken only by Sophie asking quietly, Daddy, are we in trouble? I gripped the steering wheel tighter than I meant to. No, sweetheart. You're not in trouble. None of this is your fault. But in that moment, I felt something crack inside me. It wasn't just about Christmas anymore. It wasn't about gifts. It was about respect. It was about a lifetime of being shoved into the shadows, of being told to understand, of being treated like my worth, and now my children's worth, was negotiable. Over the next few weeks, the phone calls became relentless. My parents left messages demanding we come by to work this out. Daniel sent texts dripping with mockery. Still sulking? Grow up. At first, I ignored them. Then, when they wouldn't stop, I sent one reply. Leave us alone until you're ready to treat us with respect. That only seemed to escalate things. On January 10th, I got a call from Michael's school. The principal asked if everything was all right at home. Confused, I asked why. He told me my parents had shown up at the school office that morning, demanding to see their grandson. When the school refused without my permission, my dad apparently told them I was unstable and that they were worried for the kids' well-being. I couldn't breathe for a moment. My own parents, undermining me as a father in front of the school, casting doubt on my stability. That wasn't favoritism anymore. That was betrayal. When I confronted them later that evening on the phone, Mom didn't even deny it. We had to do something, Paul. You're poisoning the children against us. We won't let you take them away from us. Take them away? I was shaking. You did that yourself when you made them feel like outsiders in their own family. Dad's voice cut in, cold and deliberate. If you want to play this game, Paul, you'll lose. You think you're protecting your children, but what you're really doing is making them resent you. They'll see the truth one day, that you're the one who kept them from us. I hung up, my hands trembling. My wife sat beside me, her face pale. Paul, she whispered, this isn't just favoritism anymore. This is war. And she was right. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. We'd been invited, well, summoned might be the better word, to Daniel's house for his daughter's birthday. Against every instinct in me, I went, mostly because Michael begged. Please, Dad, I just want to see my cousins. We don't have to stay long. So we went. And at first, it was normal enough. Cake, balloons, the usual chaos of kids running around. But halfway through, Daniel stood up with a glass in his hand and called for attention. I just want to take a moment to thank my amazing parents, he said, beaming, for all they do for us. Not just for me, but for my kids. You've given them opportunities, support, and love. We couldn't do it without you. Everyone clapped. My parents smiled, soaking it in. And then Daniel's eyes slid to me, sharp as knives. And to my brother. Well, I hope one day you'll learn what family really means. The room went quiet, eyes turning to me. My kids froze, looking up at me in confusion. My wife stiffened beside me. That's when I realized this wasn't just a jab. This was coordinated. They had turned a birthday party into a stage for my humiliation. And as I stood there, every muscle in my body taut, my mom chimed in sweetly. We only want the best for all our grandchildren, Paul. Some of them just need a little more guidance than others. The implication was clear. They weren't just undermining me privately anymore. They were doing it publicly. I clenched my jaw, forcing a smile for Michael and Sophie's sake. But inside, something inside me snapped for good. And that's when I decided I wasn't just going to defend myself. I was going to make sure they'd regret underestimating me. Because if they wanted a war, they had just declared it. The ride home from Daniel's house after that birthday party was one of the longest of my life. The kids were silent in the back seat, staring out their windows, the glow of streetlights flickering across their faces. My wife sat stiff beside me, her arms folded, her jaw clenched. And me? I just drove, my knuckles white against the steering wheel, replaying every word, every smirk, every pair of eyes on me as my family took turns painting me as the black sheep in front of an entire room. I wanted to scream. I wanted to turn the car around and march back into that house and unload everything I'd bottled up for years. But I didn't, because I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Sophie chewing her lip, holding back tears, and Michael fiddling with the zipper on his jacket like he couldn't sit still. They were the reason I didn't explode. They had seen enough already. When we got home, I tucked them into bed without much said. Sophie clung to me a little longer than usual. "Daddy," she whispered, "why does Uncle Daniel always get everything? Did we do something wrong?" That question nearly broke me. I kissed her forehead and forced my voice steady. "No, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes people don't see what's right in front of them. But I see you, and I know how amazing you are." She smiled weakly, but I could tell it didn't fully sink in. How could it, when every family gathering painted a different picture? After the kids were asleep, my wife and I sat in the living room, the only light coming from the Christmas tree we still hadn't taken down. The ornaments sparkled faintly, but it felt hollow now, like the season had been tainted. "Paul," she said quietly, "I can't keep doing this. Watching them humiliate you, watching our kids feel like second-class family members. It's not fair." I leaned forward, burying my face in my hands. "I know. I keep hoping it'll change. That one day they'll wake up and realize how much damage they're doing." Her voice softened. "But they won't. They've shown you who they are. Over and over again." She was right, of course. But admitting it out loud felt like admitting defeat. The weeks that followed were heavy. Every time my phone buzzed with a message from my parents or Daniel, my stomach twisted. Most of the time, I ignored them. But when I did read them, they were all the same. Guilt, manipulation, little barbs disguised as concern. "Paul, family shouldn't fight like this. You're overreacting, son. Don't teach your children bitterness. You've always been too sensitive. Bring the kids over. Let them see what real love looks like." That last one especially made my blood boil. Real love. As if the tears on Christmas, the humiliation at the birthday party, the whispered questions from my daughter weren't proof enough that their version of love was twisted. But despite my anger, the weight of it all began to seep into me. Work became harder. I'd sit at my desk staring at spreadsheets, my mind drifting back to that brunch table or Daniel's smirk. My boss pulled me aside one afternoon and asked if everything was okay. I lied and said I was just tired from the holidays. At home, my patience thinned. I snapped at the kids for little things, spilled juice, loud voices, things that never would have bothered me before. Each time, guilt crushed me afterward. I'd apologize, hug them, but I could see the confusion in their eyes. They didn't understand why Dad seemed so different. Even my marriage felt the strain. My wife tried to be supportive, but I could tell the constant tension was wearing her down. One night, she finally said, "Paul, you have to decide. Either we cut them off completely, or we find some way to stand up to them. But this in between, this waiting for the next attack, it's tearing us apart." Her words sat in my chest like lead. The lowest point came in February. It was Michael's school play. He had a small role, just a few lines, but he was excited. We invited my parents, even though every part of me screamed not to. Maybe, I thought, if they saw him on stage, they'd feel some pride. Maybe they'd see him the way I did. They came, sat in the third row, right beside Daniel and his family. And when Michael walked on stage, his little voice carrying across the auditorium, I looked at them. My mom was fiddling with her phone. My dad was whispering something to Daniel. My parents didn't even clap when Michael finished his lines. But when Daniel's daughter came on stage, just to carry a prop, nothing more, they erupted into applause like she was the star of Broadway. I saw Michael's face fall. He glanced at them, then at me. That hurt worse than anything. That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat alone in the kitchen. My wife had gone to bed early, drained from holding me together for months. I stared at the fridge door, covered in drawings and report cards, little reminders of my kids' worth. My chest ached. I had never felt so powerless, so defeated. And yet, in that quiet, something began to shift. I thought about all the years I'd swallowed my pride. About every time I'd let my parents dictate the terms of what family meant. about how many times I'd been told to understand. And I realized understanding hadn't earned me respect. It had only earned me more abuse. For the first time, I wondered what it would look like if I stopped playing their game altogether. If I walked away, not just in anger, but with intention. If I built something for my kids so strong that they'd never again question their worth, no matter what anyone else said. It wasn't a plan yet, just a spark. A thought I tucked quietly into the corner of my mind. But it was enough to steady me, at least for that night. The next morning, I went to work and did something I hadn't done in months. I focused. Really focused. Every time my phone buzzed with a call from my parents, I ignored it. Every time a text from Daniel popped up, I deleted it. Instead, I threw myself into my job. I stayed late, volunteered for projects, sharpened skills I hadn't used in years. It wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was survival. But as I sat at my desk one evening, the office quiet around me, I realized something important. Survival was the first step. Power came next. And deep down, I knew power was what I would need if I ever wanted to face them again. Something changed the day I decided to stop answering their calls. It wasn't dramatic. No slammed phone. No shouted, "I'm done." Just silence. Silence where their voices had once dictated my mood. Silence where their manipulation had once made me feel small. And in that silence, I started hearing myself again. The first sign of progress came at work. I'd thrown myself into projects partly to distract myself, partly to prove to myself that I wasn't the useless, sensitive son my parents always implied I was. My company had a major account on the line, a client that could either walk away or sign a contract that would keep us busy for the next 3 years. Normally, someone higher up would have handled it. But my boss, maybe sensing I needed a chance, asked me to step in. I poured everything I had into that presentation. Late nights, early mornings, coffee-fueled weekends. And when the day came, I stood in that boardroom, facing a half-dozen executives, and I realized I wasn't nervous. For once, I wasn't hearing my dad's voice in my head telling me not to get cocky. I was hearing my own. The deal closed. Not just closed, it exceeded every target. My boss shook my hand and said, "Paul, that was masterful. You just put yourself on the map." For the first time in months, I walked out of a building with my shoulders squared and my chest lifted. And when I got home, I hugged my wife and kids tighter than usual. "Guess what?" I told them. "Dad did something big today." Michael grinned, Sophie squealed, and my wife looked at me like she hadn't seen me glow like that in years. The recognition didn't stop there. Within weeks, I was invited into leadership meetings. Colleagues started asking for my input, not out of politeness, but because they trusted me. My confidence grew, step by step, like a muscle finally being exercised after years of atrophy. At home, I made a conscious effort to repair what I'd strained during the darker months. I set aside work at dinner, asked the kids about their days, actually listened. I played board games with Michael, even when I was exhausted. I let Sophie braid my hair with neon clips and giggle when it stuck up in every direction. Slowly, I saw the confusion in their eyes replaced with light again. My wife noticed too. One night, as we sat on the couch after the kids went to bed, she leaned against me and whispered, "I've missed this version of you." I kissed her forehead. I think I missed me too. It wasn't all smooth sailing. My parents didn't stop trying to reel me back in. They left voicemails, sent cards, even had Daniel bump into me outside my office building one afternoon. He leaned against my car like he owned it, arms crossed. "You think you're better than us now?" he sneered. "Heard you got some promotion." I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized something. He wasn't smug. Not really. He was scared. Scared that I was stepping out of the role they'd carved for me. The shadow that made his spotlight look brighter. "I don't think I'm better than you, Daniel," I said calmly. "I just think I'm done playing your game." He scowled, muttered something under his breath, and walked away. For once, I didn't follow him with anger in my chest. I just unlocked my car, got in, and drove home to the family that mattered. As the months passed, opportunities kept appearing. I was offered a chance to lead a new division at work, something I never would have imagined a year ago. The salary increase wasn't life-changing, but it was significant. Enough to give us breathing room, to start planning trips, to put more into the kids' future. But more than money, it was the respect. People looked at me differently now, not as an afterthought, not as someone filling a seat, but as someone who had earned his place. That respect bled into other parts of my life too. I started volunteering at Michael's school, helping coach the chess club. At first, I felt awkward, convinced I'd embarrass myself. But when Michael introduced me to his friends as my dad, he's really good at chess, I realized it wasn't about being perfect. It was about showing up. Sophie's dance recital came that spring, and I sat in the front row, camera ready. When she twirled across the stage, her face lit with pride, I clapped so loudly she covered her face and giggled. Later, she whispered in my ear, "Thanks for always cheering, Daddy." That moment meant more than any contract, any paycheck. And while I was building myself back up, I started noticing things I hadn't before. The cracks in my parents' armor. The way their calls shifted from demanding to pleading. The way Daniel's texts grew less smug and more desperate. "You're ruining this family. Don't you care what people think?" That last line made me laugh bitterly. For once, I didn't care. Not about their version of family. Not about their opinion of me. Because I finally understood something. Their power over me had always been borrowed. Borrowed from my silence, from my fear, from my desire to belong. And now that I wasn't lending it anymore, they had nothing. Still, I wasn't naive. I knew they wouldn't give up easily. People like them never do. They thrive on control, and when it slips, they claw harder. That's why I started planning quietly. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious. Just small, deliberate steps. I updated legal documents, wills, insurance policies, making sure my family was protected and independent. I kept records of every message, every voicemail, every attempt at manipulation. I didn't know yet what I'd do with them, but I knew better than to walk unarmed into whatever storm they were brewing. Most importantly, I kept building my life, brick by brick. Because the stronger I became, the less they could touch me. By summer, I felt like a different man. Not invincible, not free of scars, but stronger. My wife noticed it in the way I carried myself. My kids noticed it in the way I laughed more easily. Even colleagues noticed it in the way I spoke up in meetings. And slowly, a thought began to take root. A dangerous thought. What if I didn't just walk away from their game? What if I turned it around? What if, instead of always being on the defensive, I showed them, calmly, undeniably, that the son they had dismissed and underestimated had built something bigger than their approval could ever give him? The idea simmered quietly, tucked behind my day-to-day life. I didn't share it with anyone, not even my wife. But it was there, glowing faintly, waiting for its moment. And I had no idea how soon that moment would come. Because one late summer evening, as I sat on the porch watching the kids chase fireflies in the yard, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my mom. Just 5 words, but enough to make my stomach tighten. "We need to discuss the will." When I saw those words on my phone, "We need to discuss the will," it was like the air shifted around me. Not because I hadn't expected it. Deep down, I knew this day would come eventually. My parents had always dangled money and inheritance like strings to control us. But the timing, the casual bluntness of it, hit me hard. I stared at the message for a long time, the laughter of my kids chasing fireflies echoing faintly in the background. My wife came out with 2 glasses of iced tea, noticed the look on my face, and asked, "What is it?" I handed her the phone. She read it, her brow furrowing. "Of course," she said bitterly. "When all else fails, they fall back on the one thing they think will keep you chained, money." She wasn't wrong. For as long as I could remember, my dad made little comments about the estate, or the lake house, or the retirement accounts. Always vague enough to keep me guessing, but sharp enough to remind me of the stakes. When Daniel messed up, it was never, "You've failed." It was, "Don't worry, you'll still get your share one day." And when I tried to stand my ground, the warning was always, "Careful, Paul. You don't want to burn bridges. You know what's at stake." It was their most effective tool. The unspoken promise that if I just kept quiet, if I just understood, there'd be something waiting for me. And I'll admit, for years, it worked. I told myself I wasn't staying quiet for me. I was staying quiet for my kids, for their future. But that text, that cold, transactional text, did something different. Instead of pulling me back under their control, it lit something in me. Because suddenly, I realized, what if I didn't need it? What if I built something so strong for my family that their inheritance was irrelevant? I didn't respond to the message right away. Instead, I started researching. Not angrily, not impulsively, carefully. I read about wills, trusts, estates. I learned that just because someone threatens to cut you out doesn't mean they hold all the cards. And the more I learned, the more I saw how flimsy their power actually was. But then something happened that shifted the balance even further. At work, the success I'd had earlier in the year kept snowballing. One afternoon, my boss called me into his office and closed the door. "Paul," he said, "we've been impressed with your leadership. We'd like you to head up a new project, something big." It wasn't just big. It was transformative. Leading this project meant travel, exposure, connections I'd never dreamed of. It meant stepping into circles my family couldn't touch. And with it came a salary bump so significant that when I showed my wife the offer letter that night, she sat at the kitchen table, stunned. "Paul," she whispered, "this changes everything." She was right. Overnight, we went from comfortable but cautious to secure. We could finally breathe. We could plan for the kids' college without worry. We could take trips. We could live without glancing at the check every time we went out to dinner. And most importantly, it meant that whatever my parents dangled in front of me no longer mattered. I didn't tell them about the promotion. Not yet. I let them think I was still the same Paul they could manipulate. Because I knew better now. Information was power. And silence was a weapon. When I finally replied to my mom's text 2 days later, I kept it simple. "Sure. Let me know when." She wasted no time. "Come by Sunday. Noon. Bring your wife." That Sunday, we walked into my parents' house and were immediately hit with the familiar chill. The smell of my mom's cooking lingered, but there was no warmth behind it. Daniel was already there, of course, sitting at the head of the table like he owned it. He glanced at me with that same old smirk, though I noticed something else behind it this time, a flicker of unease. We sat down. My dad cleared his throat and launched into it. "Your mother and I have been reviewing our estate. It's time to make some decisions about the will. We want everything to be clear so there are no misunderstandings later." I stayed quiet, letting him talk. "As it stands," he continued, "the bulk of the estate, the house, the lake property, the investment accounts, will go to Daniel. He's here. He's been the one helping us maintain things, and frankly, it makes sense. Of course, Paul, you'll have your share. But we want you to understand the reasoning." There it was again. Understand. That word that had followed me like a shadow my whole life. I nodded slowly. "I see." Daniel leaned forward, eager. "It's not personal, Paul. It's just practical. You've got your job, your stability. I've been here, doing the heavy lifting." I almost laughed. Heavy lifting. The man who still called my dad when his sink leaked was claiming responsibility for maintaining their estate. But I didn't bite. Not yet. My mom chimed in. "We just don't want this to cause tension. Family should come before money. We're being transparent, so no one feels blindsided later." I glanced at my wife, who kept her expression carefully neutral. Then I looked back at my parents. "I appreciate the transparency," I said evenly. And that was it. I didn't fight. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. Because I knew something they didn't. I didn't need what they were offering. And the fact that they thought I did was exactly what gave me the upper hand. Over the next few weeks, I kept building quietly. I expanded my professional network, forged connections with people who could open doors far beyond what my family's name ever could. I started setting up a college fund for my kids, bigger than anything my parents could have left us. I even looked into real estate opportunities, a chance to build something lasting, something mine. At the same time, I kept a close eye on my parents and Daniel. The more I pulled away, the more desperate they seemed. My dad called more often, his tone shifting from authoritative to almost cajoling. "Son, you need to come by more. The kids should spend time here." My mom sent photos of Daniel's kids with captions like, "Don't you want your children to be close to their cousins?" And Daniel, well, his mask started to slip. He texted me late one night, clearly after a few drinks. "You think you're better than me? You'll see. When the will is finalized, you'll regret the way you've treated mom and dad." I didn't reply, but I saved the message. Because now, I wasn't just enduring. I was collecting, watching, waiting. And then, in early autumn, the opportunity presented itself. I got a call from an old family friend, someone who had worked with my father for decades. We caught up for a while, and then, almost offhandedly, he said, "Funny thing, your dad's been making a lot of noise about the estate lately. But between you and me, Paul, the finances aren't as solid as he makes them out to be." My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" He lowered his voice. "Let's just say your brother's been dipping into things more than he should. And your dad's been covering for him. I don't know the details, but, well, you didn't hear it from me." That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. If it was true, if Daniel had been quietly siphoning money and my parents were too proud or too blinded to admit it, then everything about their estate was a house of cards. And suddenly, I realized I didn't just have independence anymore. I had leverage. Because the son they thought was powerless, the one they assumed would understand and fall in line, was now holding the one thing they feared most. The truth. The revelation about Daniel siphoning money sat in my chest like a glowing coal. At first, I didn't know what to do with it. Should I confront my parents? Demand answers? My instinct, honed by years of their manipulation, was to hesitate, to second-guess myself. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a chance to defend myself. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, the moment to take back the narrative, to show them, calmly and undeniably, that the son they dismissed had been watching all along. The first step was confirming what I'd heard. I didn't want to go off rumors, so I started carefully. I requested some public records, checked on property deeds, investment filings, anything that could give me a picture of what was really going on. I knew my father liked to talk big about the estate, but I suspected it wasn't nearly as untouchable as he made it sound. And slowly, a pattern emerged. A loan against the lake house that hadn't been mentioned. Transfers from an account my dad once bragged about being for the grandkids. Payments that didn't line up with his or my mom's lifestyle. And then, clear as day, a record showing Daniel as a beneficiary of a suspiciously large consulting fee routed through a business tied to my father's name. I sat at my desk one night staring at the papers, my hands trembling, not from fear this time, but from a strange, cold clarity. It was true. Daniel had been bleeding the estate dry, and my parents had been either complicit or too weak to stop him. For years, they had used the promise of inheritance as a leash. And now I knew that leash was nothing but frayed string. I didn't rush to act. That wasn't the point. Revenge, I realized, wasn't about explosion. It was about exposure. About holding up a mirror and letting them choke on their own reflection. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. In October, my mom sent another text. Family dinner this Sunday. Important. Please bring the children. We want to clear the air. I showed my wife the message. She raised an eyebrow. Clear the air? Or tighten the leash? Maybe both, I said. But in my gut, I knew it was my chance. That Sunday, we walked into my parents' house to find the dining room set like a scene from a magazine. Candles, polished silver, my mom's best china. Daniel and his family were already there, of course. My parents greeted us with forced smiles, the kind that didn't reach their eyes. We ate in strained politeness until my dad finally set down his fork and cleared his throat. Paul, he began, we've been thinking. It's time to finalize the will. We don't want any confusion. We want it in writing that everyone understands. There it was again. That word. Understand. He went on, his tone heavy with authority. The house, the lake property, the bulk of the accounts, they'll go to Daniel. It's only right. He's been here, supporting us, helping with everything. You'll have your portion, of course, but smaller. You're secure on your own. This way, there's no resentment later. My mom nodded, as if she'd just delivered a sermon on fairness. We want peace in this family, Paul. This is the way to achieve it. I let the silence stretch for a moment. Everyone at the table watching me, waiting for me to do what I'd always done, swallow, nod, and understand. Instead, I leaned back in my chair and said quietly, I think it's time we actually talk about what Daniel's been taking. The room froze. Daniel stiffened, his smirk faltering. My dad's face went pale. My mom's fork clattered against her plate. What are you talking about? My dad demanded. I pulled a folder from my bag and set it on the table. Calmly, deliberately, I slid out the records I'd gathered. The loan against the lake house. The transfers from the grandkids' account. The consulting fee that went straight into Daniel's pocket. I'm talking about this, I said evenly. Years of you telling me to understand, while Daniel helped himself to what you kept dangling in front of me. And you covered for him. Daniel sputtered, his face turning red. That's business stuff. You don't understand how it works. Actually, I cut in, my voice firm, I do. I understand perfectly. You've been draining the estate you're so proud of. And the best part? You've been bragging about leaving it behind as if it's still whole. But it's not, is it? My father slammed a hand on the table. You've got no right. I leaned forward, my eyes locked on his. I have every right. Because for years, You used this inheritance as leverage. You let my kids believe they were less loved, less worthy, while Daniel's kids were showered with gifts bought from accounts that were supposed to belong to all of us. You wanted me to stay quiet, to play the fool. But I'm not quiet anymore. The silence that followed was deafening. My mom finally spoke, her voice trembling. Paul, if you think exposing this will what? I asked sharply. Ruin the family's reputation? Make people see Daniel for what he is? Maybe. Or maybe it'll just make it clear that your entire system of control was built on a lie. Either way, I'm done protecting you. Daniel pushed back from the table, his chair screeching against the floor. You wouldn't dare. You wouldn't destroy your own family. I looked at him, calm and steady. You already did. I'm just done pretending otherwise. My wife reached under the table and squeezed my hand. For once, I felt no tremor, no hesitation, just clarity. I gathered the papers back into the folder and stood. You wanted to finalize things tonight? Consider them finalized. You've shown me exactly where I stand in this family, and I've shown you that I'm not afraid of the truth anymore. As I turned to leave, I caught the look on my parents' faces, a mix of shock, fear, and something else I'd never seen before. Doubt. For the first time in my life, they weren't sure they held the upper hand. And Daniel? His face was red, his fists clenched, his voice cracking as he spat. You'll regret this, Paul. You'll regret it. But deep down, we both knew the truth. The days of me being the one to regret things were over. The night I laid those papers on the table was the night the foundation of their control cracked. I knew it when I saw the color drain from my father's face, when I caught my mother's hand trembling as she reached for her water glass, when Daniel sputtered like a cornered animal. For once, I wasn't the one shrinking under their glare. They were shrinking under mine. We left their house that evening in silence, my wife's hand steady in mine, the kids tucked in the back seat unaware of the storm we had just unleashed. I didn't explain much on the ride home, just told them we were done letting anyone treat them like they didn't matter. Sophie leaned her head against the window and whispered, "Good." In the days that followed, the fallout began in quiet ripples. My mom called twice the next morning, her voice shaky in the voicemail. Paul, let's talk. We don't need to make this ugly. Please don't show anyone those papers. 2 hours later, my dad called, his tone sharp. You've made your point. Now drop it. Don't you dare drag this family's name through the mud. And then Daniel. A barrage of texts, each more frantic than the last. You think you're clever? Those records don't prove anything. You'll ruin us all. You'll regret this. I didn't respond. Not to any of them. Silence, I realized, was louder than shouting. But silence also has a way of stirring panic. By the end of the week, I got a call from that same family friend who had tipped me off originally. Paul, I don't know what you did, he said, almost chuckling. But your father is scrambling. Word's getting around. People are asking questions. I thanked him, hung up, and sat there at my desk, the weight of it all sinking in. For years, I had lived under the belief that my parents' approval was currency, that their inheritance was a lifeline, that their word was law. And now, their word was nothing but smoke. A week later, I got the official notice. I had been written out of the will. No share, no portion, not even a token gesture. My father's lawyer sent a stiff letter stating that due to irreconcilable differences, Paul has been removed as a beneficiary. I laughed when I read it. Not bitterly, not angrily, but with genuine relief. Because they still thought that piece of paper was a weapon. They still thought they could wound me with it. But all I saw was proof that I had freed myself from their leash. When I told my wife, she actually smiled. Good. Now it's in writing that we don't owe them anything. But the true collapse came when Daniel's world started unraveling. A month later, I got another call from that same family friend. His voice was low, conspiratorial. Paul, it's happening. Your brother's little extracurriculars aren't staying hidden anymore. There's an audit. People are asking where the money went. Your father's name is tied up in it. I won't pretend I didn't feel a rush of satisfaction hearing that. For so long, they'd stood on their pedestal, smug and untouchable. And now the pedestal was crumbling beneath them. Not because of me, but because of their own arrogance, their own refusal to see what Daniel really was. Soon after, my parents called again, this time together. My mom's voice cracked as she begged. Paul, please, we need your help. You work with people, you understand finances. You can explain this away, you can make it better. I sat at my kitchen table, the phone pressed to my ear, and let her words wash over me. For years, those same voices had told me to understand, to accept, to stay quiet. And now they were the ones asking for understanding. No, I said simply. I'm done fixing messes I didn't make. My dad cut in, furious. You'll regret this, Paul. When this family name is ruined, you'll regret turning your back. I almost smiled. I've regretted a lot of things in my life. Staying silent, letting you make my kids feel small. But walking away from this family, that's not one of them. And then I hung up. The final blow came at Thanksgiving. Against my better judgment, we went, not to my parents' house, but to a larger family gathering hosted by an aunt. I hesitated, worried it would turn into another circus. But my wife urged me. Let people see who you really are, Paul. Not the story your parents and Daniel have been spinning. So we went. And as we walked in, I felt the shift immediately. People I hadn't spoken to in years approached me warmly. Paul, good to see you. Your kids are getting so big. Heard you've been doing well at work. Meanwhile, my parents sat stiffly at the far end of the table, whispers swirling around them. Daniel avoided eye contact, his face pale, his smile forced. At one point during dinner, an uncle leaned toward me and murmured, "Funny how the truth always finds its way out." Guess Daniel wasn't quite the golden boy after all. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The meal went on, laughter and conversation flowing, my kids playing happily with cousins. For once, I wasn't looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next insult or manipulation. I was just there, present, whole. When it came time for toasts, my aunt raised her glass and said, "To family, the real kind. The kind that shows up, lifts you up, and makes you proud." My parents didn't raise their glasses. Neither did Daniel. But I did. And so did my wife. And so did my children. And so did everyone who mattered. That night, as we drove home, Sophie leaned forward from the back seat and asked, "Daddy, why didn't Grandma and Grandpa smile?" I thought for a long moment before answering. Because sometimes, sweetheart, when people lose control, they forget how to smile. But that's their problem, not ours. And as I said it, I realized the truth. I had finally taken back my power. Not by yelling, not by fighting for scraps of approval, but by walking away and letting their own actions destroy them. In the months that followed, my parents' calls grew fewer. Daniel's messages stopped entirely. I heard through the grapevine that the lake house had been sold, quietly, to cover debts. The inheritance they had once lorded over me had evaporated into thin air. And I kept building. My kids thrived. My marriage deepened. My career soared. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their money. I had something better. A family of my own. One that knew love wasn't measured in gifts or control, but in showing up, in cheering the loudest, in never making someone feel small. One evening, months later, I sat on the porch again, watching the kids chase fireflies. My wife brought out 2 glasses of iced tea, just like she had that night I first got the text about the will. She handed me one, smiled, and said, "Do you ever think about them?" I sipped, thought for a moment, and shook my head. Not anymore. They thought they could define me. But they forgot one thing. She tilted her head. "What's that?" I smiled, watching Michael catch a firefly and Sophie clap her hands in delight. They forgot that I get the final word. And in that quiet, golden moment, I knew they would never take that from me again.